It was supposed to be my night. My birthday. Friends, family, even co-workers I didn't particularly like were all gathered in my backyard. The warm glow of fairy lights hung above us, swaying gently with the evening breeze. The grill still smoked faintly from dinner, laughter echoed from every corner, and the air smelled of cake frosting and spilled wine. It was the kind of celebration you imagine once a year, the one night where, no matter how hard life had been, you felt surrounded by people who cared. Or at least, that's what I thought. The music softened as my sister dimmed the lights and carried the cake out, candles glowing like tiny stars. Everyone began to sing, voices rising together, smiles aimed at me. For a moment, I let myself believe this was happiness. But just as the cake was set down in front of me, candles flickering, she stepped forward. My wife. Instead of a wrapped gift, she held an envelope. "Happy birthday," she said. Her voice was sugar, but her smile was as sharp as broken glass. She set the envelope directly on the table, sliding it across until it rested beside the cake. The crowd chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was a card. Some joked it must be tickets for a trip or maybe a surprise event she had planned. But I knew from the way her eyes gleamed that it wasn't any of those things. I picked it up slowly, the weight of it heavier than paper had any right to be. I slid my thumb under the flap, pulled out the contents, and saw them immediately. Not a card. Not tickets. Not a gift at all. Divorce papers. The chatter died instantly. Chairs scraped against the patio as people leaned in to see what was happening. My sister's gasp cut through the silence, my best friend dropped his drink, and my mother's hand flew to her chest. Every single person there understood at once. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. This was real. She leaned closer, so only I could hear, and whispered, "I hope this ruins you." Her words dripped like venom, sinking straight into the part of me that had once believed she loved me. She straightened quickly, returning to her wide, fake smile, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of my birthday party. I stared at the papers for a long moment, then lifted my eyes to hers. She expected tears. She expected me to choke on my words, to crumble in front of everyone. She thought she'd humiliated me. She thought she'd destroyed me on the one day when all eyes were on me. But instead I smiled. A slow, steady smile that made her falter for the first time that night. The crowd didn't understand yet. They only saw the man handed divorce papers on his birthday, and the wife who seemed so sure she had won. But what no one knew, what she especially didn't know, was that within 24 hours, she would be the one horrified. Because while she thought she'd been orchestrating the perfect betrayal, I had been planning something far bigger. And her little stunt had just given me the perfect stage. For most of our marriage, I played the part of the doting husband. And in many ways, I truly was. I was the one who got up first in the mornings, no matter how late I'd worked the night before. While she stayed curled beneath the covers, I'd shuffle into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, and make her coffee exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, just enough to make it smooth without diluting the strength. I'd set it on her nightstand before I left for work, a little ritual I thought meant something. I handled the bills. The mortgage. The insurance renewals. The endless drip of responsibilities that keep a household running. She hated that kind of thing and I didn't mind, so I took it on. I told myself it was my way of protecting her from stress, of being a good provider. And even after long hours at the office, when I came home drained and my head buzzing from deadlines, I'd sit across from her at dinner and listen to her talk about her day. Even when the stories bored me. Even when she didn't ask how mine had been. That was marriage, wasn't it? Give and take. Compromise. At least, that's what I thought. But beneath the comfortable routines, there were cracks. It started with little remarks. Tiny digs that didn't register as cruelty at first, but stung more than they should have. "You're still wearing that old shirt?" She'd laugh in front of her friends, wrinkling her nose. "No wonder people think you don't care about appearances." Or at dinner with coworkers, "He's terrible with directions, honestly. If it wasn't for me, he'd be lost everywhere he went." Everyone chuckled, including me, but later, alone in the car, the silence between us felt heavier. Then there were the jokes, always at my expense. If we were out with friends, I could almost guarantee she'd slip one in. A dig about how long it took me to fix the leaky faucet. A comment about how I wasn't handy. A smirk when she compared me to her friends' husbands, all supposedly more ambitious, more successful, more attentive. I brushed it off. Told myself she was just teasing. That I was being sensitive. But the cracks widened. At night, when we were supposed to be spending time together, she was glued to her phone. Her face lit by the cold glow of the screen, thumb flicking endlessly as I tried to talk to her. Sometimes she didn't even look up when I spoke. Other times she'd respond with nothing more than a distracted, I chalked it up to stress. Work was wearing on her, maybe. Or maybe we were just drifting the way couples did after a few years of marriage. I clung to that explanation, because the alternative, that she didn't care anymore, was too painful. But then things started happening I couldn't ignore. She stayed late at work more often. Meetings that dragged into the night. Dinners with clients I'd never met. And when she came home, there was perfume on her clothes, not the subtle floral scent she wore every day, but something heavier, muskier, unfamiliar. When I asked about it, she laughed. You're imagining things. Maybe it's from the office. People wear all kinds of perfumes. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But there was a look in her eyes sometimes. A smugness. Like she knew something I didn't. Like she was waiting for the moment I'd find out. I'll admit it, for a while I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking. That I was paranoid. That I had no proof. But then came the night everything changed. It was late and I'd gone to bed early. Or at least she thought I had. I lay in the dark, half asleep, when I heard voices drifting in from the kitchen. Soft, hushed, hers and her sister's. I thought maybe they were just catching up, until I caught the words that made my stomach drop. Just wait, my wife whispered, giggling softly. His birthday will be perfect. I'll finally be free. And he'll never see it coming. Her sister laughed too. You're terrible. I'm brilliant, my wife corrected. We'll see. He thinks he's so smart, so in control. But by the end of that night, he'll be nothing. I froze in the dark, every muscle in my body tensed. My heart thudded against my ribs so hard I thought they'd hear it. I wanted to storm into the kitchen, demand answers, scream at them for plotting against me. But I didn't. Something told me to stay quiet. To listen. Because for the first time, I understood. This wasn't just distance. This wasn't just drifting apart. This wasn't a rough patch or me overreacting. This was betrayal. And not just betrayal, a plan. She was orchestrating something big. Something designed to humiliate me. To break me. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, while her laughter floated down the hallway. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew then that whatever she had planned for my birthday, I couldn't stop it from coming. But I could change how the story ended. The confirmation came 2 weeks before my birthday. It was one of those ordinary Saturday afternoons when the house felt simultaneously too loud and somehow empty. The city was doing its usual hum beyond our windows. Horns, a distant siren, the rhythmic thump of an upstairs neighbor's bass, and inside the apartment the sunlight slanted through the blinds in wide bars. I was doing the stupid little chores you do when you want to feel useful. Folding laundry, wiping a countertop that was already clean, rearranging a vase of flowers my wife liked. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was just sitting there, unassuming, face down beside the fruit bowl. Normally I respected her privacy the way we'd agreed couples should, a polite boundary in a life full of shared things. But that day, there was a strange tightness in my chest. Maybe it was the way her laughter had sounded the night before, too bright, the kind of laugh that hides something. Maybe it was the way she'd brushed past me at breakfast without looking up. Whatever the reason, my hand moved before my head, and I flipped the phone over. The screen was locked. I thumbed for the passcode out of habit. She used the same number she used when we first met, but as I did, a notification preview slid into view. A message, short and casual, and 3 little words that felt like ice water poured down my spine. Can't wait for next week. He has no idea. It wasn't from a friend. The sender was listed as Ryan. Just a name. No picture. No context. Much too calm to be harmless. For a moment I just stared, the laundry basket heavy in my hands, the house so suddenly very quiet. My breath came shallow. The part of me that wanted to believe her, to be wrong, to keep everything simple, to keep the life we'd built, reached for excuses. Maybe Ryan was a colleague. Maybe there was a harmless birthday surprise. But then my thumb flicked and the conversation opened. The messages were short, the tone flippant. Whoever Ryan was, they were comfortable. They joked about travel plans, about dinners, about breaking her out of the house when the night was right. One message said, "Perfect. He'll be so angry he won't know whether to laugh or cry." Another, more brazen, read, "This is going to be epic." I read them again and then again. Each repeat felt like another small blow, like the slow tearing of fabric. My hands started to shake. The laundry basket slid from my grip and thudded to the floor. A few socks spilled past the couch as if the ordinary things in the room were trying to escape too. Anger flared in fierce, hot bursts, natural, loud, animal. But along with it came a different sensation, colder and stranger. A clarity, like someone switching on a lamp in a dim room. The hot rush of fury was there, sure, but it was accompanied by a measured calm. I could feel it in my bones. This was not some fleeting mistake. This was deliberate. And it was proof. I took the screenshots like a professional, with methodical steadiness, saving each message, every timestamp. I scrolled back through the thread until I found logistics, times, references to places I didn't know, mentions of after your shift, and hotel. It was there, an old reservation number, partially cut off, a reference to a room booked, for 2 nights, Jameson Hotel, and a time that matched one of the late nights she told me was a meeting. I didn't act that moment. Instead, I put the phone back on the counter where it had been, sitting like an archaeological specimen in the small ruin of our kitchen. My hands felt strangely steady. The panic had been replaced by a cold, pragmatic focus. If this was happening, I needed everything, and I needed it organized. That evening I found more. In the trash bin under the sink, wedged between coffee grounds and an empty cereal box, was a hotel receipt balled up so badly someone had thought they could hide it in plain sight. I fished it out with my fingers, elbows bent against the counter, and smoothed it on the kitchen table like a crime scene photograph. Jameson Hotel. The dates matched a night she had worked late. The total was substantial. There was a name, too, a last name scribbled on the top in hurried handwriting, R. I felt a ridiculous, small moment of triumph. Not the kind that felt good, but the kind that felt necessary. Proof. The thread of the story I'd been slowly suspecting was beginning to knit itself together into something tangible. That night, I did something I'd thought I'd never do. I called a lawyer. Her name was Judith. I'd met her once, at a mutual friend's wedding years ago. Sharp cheekbones, a voice that cut through polite conversation like a scalpel, and eyes that gave the impression that she cataloged everything she saw and forgot nothing. I'd stored her contact information in my phone because of that presence, almost like keeping a survival kit in a drawer. You hope you never need it, but you're relieved it's there. When she answered, I didn't make small talk. I told her the basics in a measured voice, feeling the words out like stones I laid down carefully. Messages. Receipts. Dates. Can you meet? I asked. She said she could, after closing a brief at midnight. She came to our apartment the next morning with a leather portfolio under her arm and an expression that was equal parts business and curiosity. She sat down at our table as if she owned the place for that hour, adjusted her glasses, and asked one question, "What do you want to happen?" It was not confrontational. It was the kind of question that required you to name the endgame. "What I want," I said slowly, feeling the authority in saying it aloud, "is control." She nodded like she'd expected that answer. Good. Because reacting is what they expect. They want a scene. They want you to scramble. To be a mess. Control is the only way to deny them the pleasure. We went through what I had and what I could get. She listened without interruption, flipping through the screenshots I handed her like a reader skimming a draft. She asked the right questions: dates of late nights, access to emails, whether we shared financial accounts, who had keys, whether there was a prenuptial agreement. Her pen flew across a pad in neat, tiny strokes. 2 things, she said after a while. 1, gather everything and back it up in at least 3 places. And 2, don't confront her. Not yet. If she's planning theater, confronting her will only hand her the script. How long? I said. How long can I keep this to myself? How long before she files? She looked at me with a frankness that was almost kind. If she's planning an ambush, she's likely to file within days. People like to escalate when there's an audience. That said, you have options. If you file first, or at least put a legal stop in place, you control the narrative. But filing has costs: personal, legal, emotional. You need to be sure you want the war. Her words were an odd relief. The truth was a kind of map. Once you saw the roads, you could choose your route through them. We made a list. Practical things. Steps. She taught me to think like someone who'd been inside too many stories like this. Screenshot every message, every timestamp, export them to a secure email account that only I could access. Copy the hotel receipts, and track any bank transfers that match dates. Check our shared tablet synced locations. Install a recorder where conversation is likely to happen, car, living room, wherever it's legal to do so, but be meticulous about laws in the state. Create a separate account for any funds you'll need. Buy a safe deposit box and store physical evidence there. And, importantly, prepare your story, what you'll tell friends and family when the time comes. She leaned back and looked at me. You're fortunate she's sloppy, she said, and sloppiness makes for evidence. People who plan theater often forget to hide their receipts. Don't let emotions make you careless now. There was a weight to her voice, a damper that took the drama out of the situation and left the work. That felt perversely comforting. It gave direction. Over the next 48 hours, I moved like someone learning a new language. The adrenaline that had once made me want to smash things channeled into precise, almost compulsive busyness. I started at the basics, digital backups. I created a new email address that used a throwaway provider and forwarded everything to it from my own address, so there was an extra secure copy away from our usual channels. I downloaded the message threads into PDFs and saved them in 3 cloud accounts with 2-factor authentication. I used a password manager to store access codes and logged every step in a physical notebook: date, action taken, file name. The notebook would later be part of the story I showed, a chronological map of the evidence collection. Then I went looking. The trash can was only the beginning. She'd been sloppy, but not stupid. I combed the apartment like someone checking for landmines, pockets, jacket linings, the depths of the couch cushions. In the glove compartment of her car I found another receipt, this one creased and stained with coffee: dinner at Leru, an upscale spot a block from a hotel district. The date matched another night she'd said was a client dinner. I photographed it, saved it, labeled it Leru, September 8th. Next, I did something that felt like crossing a threshold. I set up a small recording device in the car, attached with magnets under the passenger seat. I'd read about the devices that were small as the climb of a fingernail, magnetic, voice-activated. I ordered one online and had it delivered to an address that wasn't ours. When it arrived, my hands trembled a little as I slipped it into place. There was a calculation of risk in the back of my mind. Legalities, the morality of listening to conversations, but Judith had been clear about the law in our state. One-party consent for recordings in public or in private places where one party is present and consents. Since I had access to her car, and my own presence made it lawful for me to record conversations I was party to, it wasn't illegal. It was the surgical tool I needed. I also did digital reconnaissance. I found a LinkedIn profile for a Ryan with a last name that matched the scrawl on the hotel receipt. A younger man, pictures of city bars, travel tags, a lack of family photos. He had an Instagram, too, curation of smiles in dim restaurant light and an about me that said, always up for a good time. There was, of course, no evidence in public posts of any wrongdoing. The smart ones never leave that, but cross-referencing the dates with the hotel's public event calendar gave me matches I could later use to show pattern. Money left traces of its own. I cloistered myself in late nights poring over our joint accounts, the ones she'd always trusted me to manage. There were small irregularities, Unexplained transfers for amounts that matched the hotels and dinner tabs I'd found. Tiny withdrawals to cash that could disappear. I took screenshots, highlighted amounts, circled dates. I started an index folder on my laptop labeled Financial 2025, and inside it, page after page of annotated statements. Sometimes, the pragmatism wavered and the old hurt crashed through. I'd catch myself imagining confronting her, throwing the papers down at her feet, shouting the truth in her face. I'd rehearse the speech in the mirror, accusing, vindicated, raw. Then I'd turn off the thought like a faucet. Judith was right. Drama was their weapon. Giving them drama was handing them victory. I wanted to take that away. I met Judith again in her office. Modern, spare, a single plant in the corner that somehow made the place less like a war room and more like a calm planning table. She listened to what I'd found and, without drama, drafted the options. We could file first. In our state, the first filer often sets the tone for asset division. We could wait and collect more evidence to leverage for damages, emotional distress, public humiliation. We could move assets, open new accounts, put some emergency funds in a place my wife never checked. A small, anonymous savings account with a private post box as the registered address. What about the social fallout? I asked her once, in a quieter moment. If I file first, people will think I'm the aggressor. She turned that over like a chess player considering a gambit. They will. But the question is whether you prefer to be the perceived aggressor or the private victor. We're not playing for likes. We're playing to preserve your life, financially and emotionally. I started thinking like that, chess, not checkers. Long before the birthday cameo. Long before the envelope slid over the table. We planned for contingencies. If she tried to make me the villain, we'd have a prepared narrative, staged so that when she spun her version, we could show receipts and recordings that made a liar out of her. By the end of that week, I'd become a careful archivist. I had hard copies in a small locked box, receipts, hotel confirmations, the balled-up crumpled paper from the trash, and encrypted backups in the cloud. I had a safe deposit box reserved in the name of an LLC I set up for a side project months ago, and I left the key with a friend I trusted implicitly. The act of collecting made me feel less powerless. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it gave me agency. When I looked at the evidence laid out in neat piles on the dining room table, I felt, for the first time since the whisper in the kitchen, like I could breathe again. Not that I didn't have nights where the old pain returned raw and immediate. I would sit at the edge of our bed and listen for the sound of the house, the creak of floorboards, the fridge, the soft susurration of a show on the living room TV, and imagine being handed that envelope in a room full of people. I'd picture the faces, the pity, the whispered condolences. The imagination could assault you as viciously as reality. But even in those nights, my plan sat like a steady hearth at the center of my thoughts. Every receipt cataloged was a brick laid in a wall I was building around a new life. Every recording saved was a door I could close on him and the theater she planned to stage. When my birthday drew closer and the invitations rolled out, part of me wanted to cancel everything, run away from the porch lights and the cake and the crowd. But Judith advised otherwise. Let her think she controls the stage, she said. We'll set our own curtain call. At the end of the turning point, as my birthday approached like a train I'd already boarded, two things were true. The proof existed, and I had decided to act not out of emotion but out of strategy. The person I had been, gentle, bewildered, trying to smooth inconveniences into smiles, was still inside me, but a new version had emerged, deliberate, watchful, and patient. Control, I kept telling myself, was not vengeance. Control was survival. And if surviving meant outthinking the person who wanted to humiliate me, then I would learn every step of that game. The last image I allowed myself that week was deliberately small, me in our kitchen, under the slant of late afternoon light, folding a napkin and sliding it into the box I'd labeled evidence. It was a domestic motion, ordinary, almost trivial, and the everyday ordinariness of it calmed me. I closed the lid and locked it, and in the sound of the click there was a promise. Not of revenge, not of malice, but of an ending I would choose. From that day forward, every move I made was deliberate. No more drifting through mornings on autopilot. No more absent-minded small talk at dinner. Every glance, every smile, every nod of agreement I gave her was calculated, camouflage for the war I was quietly preparing. I already had the proof I needed, receipts, screenshots, bank statements and recordings, all cataloged and backed up. I'd photographed hotel slips, exported message threads with timestamps, and flagged odd charges on our accounts. It was all chronological, labeled, and impossible to wave away. But the most damning piece came from the small recording device I slid under the passenger seat of her car. It was no bigger than a lighter, voice-activated, with a battery that lasted for days. Installing it was almost anticlimactic. One quick press of a magnet and it was in place, invisible. What I heard later made my blood run cold. "He's pathetic," Ryan's voice crackled through the playback. "Making him think it's his fault, while we plan everything. He won't know what hit him." Her laughter followed, sharp and cruel. "That's the point. He deserves it." Each word was a nail in the coffin she thought she was building for me. What she didn't know was that I was already hammering together her own. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Judith drilled that into me during one of our late-night meetings. "Proof of infidelity helps in negotiations," she said, "but what really matters is leverage. Legal leverage. Something she can't wriggle out of no matter how many crocodile tears she sheds." That's when she reminded me of the post-nuptial agreement. It had started as a joke, one of her crueler ones. Years ago, after too much wine at a dinner party, she'd teased about getting a prenup if she ever left me. "You never know," she'd laughed, her friends giggling along. "Might as well protect myself." The next day, sober but smug, she'd actually suggested a postnup. At the time, I thought it was silly but harmless. I went along with it, partly to prove I trusted her, partly to keep the peace. We'd both signed it without much thought. Now, that forgotten document was my weapon. Because buried in its clauses was one very important stipulation. Whoever filed first controlled the terms of asset division. She thought she was clever, planning to humiliate me with a dramatic filing on my birthday. But I had beaten her by 72 hours. With Judith's help, the petition had been drafted, signed, and quietly submitted days before she had any idea. By the time she stood in front of me with her smug smile and her manila envelope, thinking she'd destroyed me, she'd already lost the war. Living in the in-between was the hardest part. Every day I had to pretend nothing had changed. In the mornings, I still made her coffee, sliding the mug onto her nightstand like I always did. She'd take it without looking at me, scrolling her phone, smiling at messages I knew weren't mine. My stomach twisted, but my face stayed calm. At night, I lay beside her in bed while she typed furiously, her screen lighting up her features. Sometimes she turned slightly away from me, shielding the screen with her shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't confront. I simply memorized the rhythm of her keystrokes, filing it away with everything else. There were moments she tested me. Little provocations. "You work too much," she'd sigh, as if that explained her absences. "You never take me anywhere nice." I nodded, let her think she was in control. Let her believe the lie she'd built. All the while, my evidence binder grew thicker, my backups more secure. And slowly, something inside me shifted. I no longer felt powerless. I no longer felt like the confused husband trying to patch holes in a sinking ship. I felt like an architect, quietly drafting the blueprint of her downfall. But I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building something else. A gift. It sat in my office, hidden behind stacks of old tax documents she'd never bothered to touch. A plain cardboard box at first, but inside, it was anything but plain. I'd chosen crisp gold paper for the wrapping, the kind that shimmered in the light, expensive enough to catch the eye. A velvet ribbon tied in a perfect bow. To anyone else, it looked like the kind of luxury present you'd expect at a milestone birthday. Something extravagant, something enviable. But inside lay her undoing. I arranged each piece carefully, like fragile ornaments. Because in a way, they were. Fragile and devastating. When the box was closed and the ribbon tied, I placed it on the shelf in my office and just looked at it for a while. To anyone else, it was just a gift. But to me, it was something far more important. The insurance policy, the finale, the ace up my sleeve. In the days leading up to my birthday, I became an actor. At work, I smiled as though nothing was wrong. At home, I laughed at her jokes, nodded when she complained, played the part of the oblivious husband. Inside, my mind was a battlefield, each move calculated, each word measured. It was exhausting but necessary. If she suspected even for a second that I knew, she might change her plan. And I wanted her to go through with it. I wanted her to think she'd won, right up until the moment she realized she hadn't. Every time I glanced at the gold-wrapped box, my resolve hardened. She thought she was building a coffin for me. But really, she'd been hammering her own, and I was the one driving the final nails. The night of my birthday arrived like the final act of a play. The backyard glowed with fairy lights strung across the trees, soft music humming from the speakers. Tables were covered in crisp white cloths, candles flickering in the warm summer air. Guests milled around, laughing, sipping wine, their voices a low buzz that should have felt comforting but instead sounded like the orchestra tuning before a performance. And she was the conductor. My wife flitted from group to group, her laughter pitched too high, her smile too wide. Every so often her eyes flicked toward me, and there it was again, that smugness. The same smugness I'd seen in her texts, heard in her voice when she thought I wasn't listening. The confidence of someone who believed she was holding the winning hand. I played my part. I smiled. I accepted the congratulations, the hugs, the toasts. I blew out the candles on the cake when it was set before me. Everyone clapped. Cameras flashed. It was the picture of a happy birthday. And then it happened. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the patio stones. In her hand was not a gift bag, not a wrapped box, but a plain white envelope. She placed it on the table in front of me, directly beside the cake, her smile sharp as glass. "Happy birthday," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. For a moment, no one understood. Guests leaned forward, curious, waiting for me to open what they thought was a card. But the air shifted when I slid the papers halfway out and the word divorce glared from the top line. Whispers rippled through the crowd. My mother's jaw dropped. My best friend muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath. Someone gasped. Another guest stifled a nervous laugh, thinking it must be some kind of sick joke. But it wasn't a joke. I lifted the papers fully, letting the chandelier's light hit the yellow highlights she had so carefully marked. She retains the house, she keeps the assets, I vacate immediately. She had laid it out as neatly as a trap. And then I looked up at her and smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't bitter. It was the kind of smile that comes from knowing something no one else does. Her smug expression faltered, just slightly, confusion flickering at the edges. That was my cue. I reached beneath the table and slid out the gold-wrapped box I had placed there hours before. The velvet ribbon gleamed under the lights, the paper pristine. The crowd murmured, confused, craning their necks. Her smile snapped back into place, brittle but holding. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharper than before. "Your gift," I said calmly, pushing it across the table toward her. She hesitated. The box sat between us like a loaded weapon. Her fingers trembled as she untied the ribbon, the silky strands falling uselessly to the floor. She tore the paper, her movements no longer elegant, and lifted the lid. And then the color drained from her face. Inside, neatly arranged in layers of evidence, was everything. The postnup, notarized, binding, the very document she had once insisted on as a joke. The bank statements, highlighted in yellow, showing the transfers she thought I hadn't noticed. The hotel receipts with Ryan's name, each one dated, cataloged, undeniable. The photographs, screenshots, timestamps, images of her lies preserved in digital permanence. And finally, on top of it all, the stamped divorce filing. My filing. Dated 3 days earlier. The room went silent. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper as she flipped desperately through the documents, her hands trembling. This isn't possible," she whispered, her voice thin, her eyes darting between the papers and me. "Oh, it's very possible." The voice came from the back corner of the room. Judith. She had insisted on attending, standing quietly by the drinks table all evening, unnoticed by most. Now she stepped forward, her tone carrying the authority of a courtroom. And it's legally binding. Gasps echoed again. Heads turned. Whispers swelled. My wife stumbled back a step, horrified, realizing in real time that not only had she failed to humiliate me, she had exposed herself instead. My mother rose slowly from her chair, fury etched into her face. You tried to do this here? To him? On his birthday? Guests began piecing it together, their sympathetic looks shifting from her to me. Ryan's name, circled in ink, glared from one of the receipts she had let slip onto the table. Someone picked it up, read it, and passed it along. Murmurs grew louder. Her sister, the same one who had giggled with her in the kitchen weeks before, looked like she might faint. She covered her mouth, unable to meet my eyes. My wife dropped the papers as though they were burning her skin. You set me up, she spat, her voice trembling, trying to summon her usual venom. I stood slowly, folding the envelope she had given me and placing it neatly on top of the cake. No, I said, my voice calm, clear, steady enough for everyone to hear. You set yourself up. I just documented it. A nervous laugh bubbled from somewhere in the crowd, quickly silenced by the tension hanging heavy in the air. She turned to Judith, desperate now. You can't do this. He can't. Judith cut her off with the efficiency of a scalpel. Voluntary intoxication doesn't invalidate a contract in this state. You signed the post-nup yourself. You dated it. His filing is legitimate. Everything in that box is admissible. Legally and morally you're finished. The finality of her words landed like a hammer. My wife's bravado crumbled. Her knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. The whispers turned into a low roar now, fragments of sentences carried across the air. She really tried this? On his birthday? Unbelievable. She must have thought he was blind. And through it all I stood calm. I wasn't the victim she thought she'd made me. I wasn't the fool. I was the man who had taken control back, who had rewritten the ending. Her eyes darted around wildly, searching for an ally, but all she saw were faces of shock, disappointment, even disgust. Ryan wasn't there to save her. No one was. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small under her gaze. I didn't feel trapped. I felt free. The next 24 hours unraveled faster than even I could have imagined. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. One flick, and suddenly everything she thought was indestructible scattered to the ground. By midnight, Ryan had already vanished. The same man who had whispered promises in her ear, who had laughed about how pathetic I was, ghosted her the second the evidence came to light. No calls. No texts. Nothing but silence. For all his bravado, he'd clearly seen enough to know his name tied to the mess would ruin him, too. My in-laws, the people who had always taken her side, who had rolled their eyes when she mocked me, who told me more than once to be grateful you married up, turned on her almost instantly. When they saw the recordings, the receipts, the highlighted statements, they couldn't defend her anymore. Her father wouldn't look at her. Her mother cried quietly into a napkin, shame etched across her face. And Judith, my lawyer, didn't waste a second. Before the cake had even been cut, she'd filed the necessary orders to freeze the accounts my wife had been siphoning from. By morning, the cards she thought were her safety net were all declined. Calls flooded my phone that night and the next morning. From her. From her friends. Even from her sister, whose voice shook with disbelief. Just talk to her, her sister begged. She didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't answer. Not a single one. Every voicemail was more desperate than the last. Each message dripped with panic. But I let them pile up, silent reminders of how quickly arrogance turns to fear. By noon, I was gone. I didn't just storm out, I moved out. Because what she never realized was that months earlier, I had already secured an apartment of my own. Judith had insisted on it. A clean break, a place untouched by her games. A space where I could breathe. It wasn't flashy. Just a 2-bedroom on the other side of the city with tall windows and quiet neighbors. But when I unlocked the door that afternoon, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and my binder of evidence, it felt like freedom. The silence was beautiful. No cruel laughter echoing from the other room. No perfume clinging to clothes that weren't mine. No staged smiles hiding knives. Just peace. Meanwhile, back at the house, her horror deepened. Because she assumed that no matter what, the house would be hers. That was the crown jewel in her plan. The reason she'd highlighted that clause so neatly in the papers she handed me at my birthday dinner. But the postnup, the one she'd once laughed about, the one she signed herself, had a little clause she hadn't counted on. A clause that transferred ownership under my name the moment infidelity was proven. And with my filings submitted first, everything was locked in. She had expected to ruin me. Instead, she was the one scrambling, standing in the ruins of her own arrogance. It didn't stop with finances. Word spread quickly. Our friends, our neighbors, even her colleagues, they all knew what had happened. Not because I told them, but because she had chosen to make her move public. She had staged her grand humiliation in front of everyone, and instead, she humiliated herself. I didn't have to say a word. The whispers did it for me. She really tried to serve him at his own birthday? And he had everything ready? God, that's brutal and kind of brilliant. Her carefully cultivated image, the charming wife, the witty hostess, the woman who always had the upper hand, shattered overnight. By the end of the week, she wasn't just abandoned by Ryan. She was avoided by nearly everyone. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Her coworkers exchanged looks when she walked into the office. She had tried to play director in a theater of cruelty, and now the entire audience had turned on her. For me, the aftermath was different. Quiet. Measured. I woke up in my new apartment the next morning to sunlight streaming across unfamiliar walls. The first thing I noticed was the absence of weight. No dread. No tightness in my chest. Just space. I bought groceries I actually liked. Stocked the fridge with things she always mocked me for eating. I cooked dinner in silence, tasting every bite without commentary about how I seasoned it wrong. Piece by piece I rebuilt. Judith walked me through the next steps, securing assets, transferring titles, finalizing the freeze orders. She was relentless, efficient, and for the first time in years, I felt like someone was firmly on my side. I sold the car she insisted we keep because appearances mattered. I replaced it with something practical, something mine. I hung prints I'd collected years ago, ones she'd called tacky, and made me hide in the closet. The space became mine. Not just physically, but emotionally. Every object I chose, every color I painted, was a reminder that I was free to decide. She, on the other hand, unraveled. When she realized I wasn't coming back, she escalated. Long, rambling emails about how we could fix things. Apologies written like scripts, as if she thought the right performance would win me over. Then the anger came. Threats. Accusations. Attempts to paint me as cruel. But the evidence spoke louder than her words, and every time she tried to twist the story, someone would remind her of what they saw that night. Even her parents stopped defending her. Her father called me once, his voice heavy. "I don't know what to say, son. She brought this on herself." After a month, she was living alone in a rented apartment, Ryan long gone, her reputation in tatters. The night of the divorce hearing, she sat across the courtroom, pale and drawn. Her lawyer tried to argue, but the judge barely needed convincing. The evidence was too strong. The postnup was ironclad. When the gavel came down, it was over. She looked at me as if expecting me to say something, to gloat, to sneer. But I didn't. I just stood, nodded to Judith, and walked out. Because the truth was, this was never about revenge. It was about freedom. Weeks later, I invited a few close friends over to the new apartment. Nothing extravagant, just takeout, laughter, the kind of evening where no one was waiting for the next cruel comment to drop. At one point, my best friend raised a glass. "To finally being free," he said. We all clinked glasses, and I realized he was right. Free. Not just from her, but from the version of myself I'd been while I was with her. The man who kept trying to prove himself, who kept bending until he almost broke. Now I stood straighter, spoke louder, laughed without fear of correction. And when I went to bed that night, I slept without dreams of betrayal. Just silence. She had tried to ruin me in front of everyone. Instead, she ruined herself. Because arrogance blinds. Cruelty thinks it will always win. But when you prepare, when you stay patient, when you gather your strength, the tables can turn in ways the cruel never expect. And the moment they realize it, that moment is worth everything. If you felt even one shiver of satisfaction, tap the like button. It tells the algorithm this was worth watching. Subscribe if you're new here and want more stories of justice and payback. Tap the bell to get notified when the next story drops.